Awesome. Well, Bonjour, Ani Tanzi, Spy, Dénommé-Welch, Indigenous. Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you could all be here this evening for tonight's conversation with Tomson Highway. This is an event brought to you by the Words Festival in partnership with Western University's Faculty of Music. It is my pleasure and honor to join you as host for this evening's conversation with world-renowned Cree author, playwright, composer, concert pianist, and multilingual storyteller, Tomson Highway. Known for his many talents and work in areas across literature, theater, music, storytelling, and performance, Tomson is a person who requires little to no introduction. As evidenced by the words from his new memoir, Tomson has a way of expressing worlds and stories, both old and new, which resonates across culture, gender, age, language, and geography. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I, like many of you, am keen to engage in this discussion tonight. For everyone's information, during this evening's conversation, we'll be monitoring audience questions and comments. So you can kindly drop your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to pose as many of these at roughly about the 45 to 60 minute mark into this conversation. I think that about covers everything. So why don't we get started? I started here, Tomson, by preparing some questions just to get the ball rolling, if that's all right with you. First things first. Tomson, you've had a wonderfully prolific and engaging career. There is no debating that. What I'm really interested to know is what inspired you at this point in time to write this memoir? And furthermore, as the focal point of the memoir, what compelled you to look primarily at your formative years for the source of storytelling? And what is it about this period of time in your life that you wanted to share with the world?
My goodness, that's a three-headed question. That's three questions right there.
Get
Very long
you
question.
started, eh?
So it'll necessarily have to be a long answer. I wrote it. Well, I wrote only about the first 15 years of my life, first of all, because I've had a long life, fortunately. And I've had an extraordinary life. And so there's lots of good stories to tell, really juicy stories to tell. With the next, there'll be 5 books eventually, which will take me to 8. If they cover a 15-year periods, every one of them. London appears in the third one, because I was at Western. I'm a graduate of Western. And I spent my years from age 20 to 30 in London. So it'll be the second book. Oh my God, it's going to be the next book, London, Ontario. My years in London, Ontario, which I loved. I just loved it when I was there in the 1970s, before most of you were born. Before you were born, Spy. Anyway, so I wanted to tell, I come from a very an unusual part of Canada. Most people know, most good Canadians, whom I absolutely adore, um, come from the Canada, the very narrow strip of Canada that borders the American frontier. Okay, from Winnipeg to Vancouver, back to Toronto and Halifax. That's pretty well that little strip. 90% of Canadians live there, and the other 10%, the further north you go, the fewer and fewer people you have. So that by the time you get to my part of the world, where I was born, which is the part of Manitoba that borders what is now called Nunavut, and Saskatchewan, not Churchill, that's the other end. Churchill was about 500 miles from us. I still think in miles because that's what we lived with back then. Now I think in kilometers, but that's here. Up north, it's still miles. I come from the extreme northwest corner of Manitoba, where it meets Saskatchewan and the northwest, and what was then called the Northwest Territories, but it's now called Nunavut. And that is a part of the world that nobody has ever seen, except for those of us who come from there. They don't know that there are, from my little village up in we came from a First Nation called Brochet, nominally, but we had a house there at the northern tip of a gigantic lake called Reindeer Lake. But we were hardly ever there. We were nomads. We were always out in the land hunting for caribou and fishing for trout and hunting moose and God knows what else. And we were nomads. I was born, and people don't know that this land, this particular corner of Manitoba has 10,000 lakes. Beautiful, every single one of them. Oh my God, clear blue water, drinkable with your hand. When was the last time you did that in Lake Erie? Put your hand into the water and drank the water, or the Thames River for that matter. You know, You'd have to go back an awfully long way to go back. But well, today where I'm from, you can still do that. And Reindeer Lake, the north part of which comes, it's about 250 miles south of the Nunavut border. It straddles the Manitoba, Saskatchewan, the lake. It's 1/8 in Manitoba, and the northern eighth is in Manitoba. The southern and western part is in Saskatchewan. My father's from Saskatchewan. My mother's Manitoba. So I'm a borderline person. We grew up right on the border. We used to skip rope with the border when I was a child. We used to play tag across the border. We used to hide in Manitoba and count in Saskatchewan. We really grew up with that border. And and people, like for instance, Reindeer Lake itself, picture a lake the size of Lake Erie with 5,000 islands, most of them surrounded by beautiful sand beaches that make them look like Brazil, and no people, just us, the few people who live up there, the Cree, the Dene, and the Inuit. That's all who's ever seen this land, and you'll never see it because it's inaccessible. You'd pretty well have to be the richest man in Canada to be able to afford to rent a bush plane, hydravion, as they say in French, a float plane to get up there, to charter it. And chartering planes up there is expensive and the distances are long. The land is vast. People don't know that. 10,000 lakes where I come from, and we had 30 of them to ours, just my family. So my father was the king of this enormous domain, and we grew up like princes. Like we have royalty in Canada too, you know. And so giving you an idea of the vastness of that land, from the Manitoba border, Manitoba-Nunavut border to the North Pole, which is almost in Canada, is the same distance as that between Vancouver and Halifax. Nunavut, just Nunavut alone, has the same land surface as all of Western Europe, except that Western Europe, from the Russian border right to Portugal, has a population of almost 500 million these days, where Nunavut has only 37,000 people. It would be the same number of people as who live in Woodstock or a town like that, you know. And so we had this land to ourselves, and it's extraordinary. Extraordinarily beautiful. I was born in paradise and I grew up in paradise. You know, it was extraordinary, and it still is. It still is. I go up twice a year, even though it's fiercely expensive to go up there. I go up twice a year. It costs me, from this area, I live in Gatineau, Quebec, which is why I live in French. I left the English language behind me a long time ago. I married into the French community. It cost me twice as much to go up to Brochet, Manitoba, the land where I was born, as it cost me to twice for the flight to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. 3 times as it cost me to fly to London, England. So we grew up with these travel prices since I was in high school. I went to high school in Winnipeg. So we grew up with this. We never think, we just don't think about it. We just spend this money, and to us, we just do it. We don't even think about it. It's just a part of our lives, eh? Most kids down in the South just have to walk 4 blocks to go and see their parents, you know? Most kids down south walk 5 blocks to go to the nearest boarding school, the nearest grade school, 10 blocks to go to the nearest high school, an hour's bus ride away to go to the nearest university, some of which are damn good, like Winnipeg's, for instance, and London, Ontario. And then we didn't have, to us that was extraordinary, like incredible luxury, unheard of luxury. But with the distance that we grew up with, the nearest two, we had to leave home. We had no choice. We had to fly by bush plane. Imagine going to school by bush plane, eh? 500 miles south to the Par, Manitoba, which is in central Manitoba. And that's where I went to boarding school for 9 years. And then I was sent to high school in Winnipeg. And then I continued in university at Western for a reason as to why I ended up in Brooklyn. And then the other part of it is that it sounds unusual. People think I'm lying when I say that I was born in a snowbank. You know, it sounds fictional. Well, if you go up there and you know that land, you will know that back in the 1950s, when I was born, people were born that way all the time. It was a lifestyle. It was part of the lifestyle. We're talking about another era, another time zone. And just further north of it, like people born in tents pitched in snowbanks. Eh? The only way of travel up there back there was dogsled, which is the most amazing way of traveling, and slow but beautiful beyond compare. And so further north, if we were born in snowbanks, or some of us were born in lean-tos over snow, so that one wall was exposed to the elements, and then we're talking 40-degree weather, 40 below weather here. This is the north. This is the Arctic. Further north of us, about 100, 200 miles, people were born in houses made of ice. They're called igloos. That was the lifestyle back then. It was just normal. And the other part that's normal for us back then, that's not normal in the South, that people have a hard time getting their minds around, is that most people had 12, 14, 16 children, most families. And that because of the harsh living conditions, the other truth was that people lost a lot of kids. The infant mortality rate was very high, so that if you had 14 kids, losing half of them was normal. We had my parents had 12 kids. I'm the 11th of 12 children, and they lost five before I was born. So I never knew them, but they were born before. They died as children. Two as little girls of 7 and 9, and one as a girl of 3 and two babies. So they lost that much. They lost that much. Imagine your parents losing 5 children. That would decimate the family, and it would be gone. There would be no children left, and your parents would be childless for the rest of their lives. Imagine a lifestyle like that. It was very hard, but at the same time, because of the harshness, it was beautiful beyond compare. So I wanted the world, and I wanted the world, and I'm the last of a breed. That lifestyle does not exist anymore. Electricity arrived in 1973 when I was 21 years old. Now I'm giving my age away. Uh, and that's when television arrived as well, and that's when things really started changing. Okay, the skidoo arrived, and then they built roads up there, and trucks started arriving, and cars, and oh my God, now the village is decimated. All the beautiful green grass is gone. It's all paved, it's all graveled over. It's all there used to be Brochet, the name of my village,
Mhm.
was one giant wild raspberry field. So that in August, to get from our house to the Hudson Bay store, which is the only store in town, to walk the quarter mile, it would take us an hour and a half. A walk that would normally take 10 minutes would take us an hour and a half because we were so busy picking raspberries and eating them right there with our hands as children, right? And so we grew up in paradise, and people don't have never heard of that kind of lifestyle. And I wanted the world to know that this lifestyle existed, that Canada has this magic, that there are people like that still to this very day, and who don't quite live the way we did, but now they use skidoos, for instance, and which are very noisy. And before I was born, there were no outboard motors. So people only paddled by canoe. The immense river system up there, the rivers and the rapids and the waterfalls, and connecting all the 10,000 lakes, and uh, and uh, and then the 10 horsepower motor came in about about when I was a baby, and so we started going a little bit faster. You don't go very fast. We moved to the 10 horsepower motor, but that's all we had. And then later on, by the time the 1970s came around, when I was already an adult, the great big motors came in. I mean, I have a nephew who has a 75 horsepower Johnson, which can cross Reindeer Lake in a matter of 4 hours. In my day, it took us 4 days to cross Reindeer Lake from north to south. Anyway, I wanted to tell those kinds of stories and the kind of magic that happens in a place like that, far, far, far from the realities of an urban lifestyle. And I'm very, very proud of it. I grew up in paradise. I refuse to believe that we were kicked out of paradise. I cannot believe that story, that a woman engaged in an act of pleasure, meaning the eating of the fruit from a certain tree, and therefore it's her fault that we got kicked out. That doesn't seem right to me. And I want to ask that question. I want to see what kind of answers people have for that question. And I will through the course of these 5 books that I'm planning. I mean, not that's all I'm going to do. I also write plays. I write music. I got a music degree from Western. I'm a piano player. I look like an accordion player, but I'm actually a piano player. And anyway, I was just going to tell people that how. And I want to, most of all, I wrote this book because I want to tell the world that I have probably the most spectacular childhood in the entire history of childhood. I had a better childhood than the Queen's children. I mean, who else has eagles, brown eagles, at their dinner table? You know, and there's a whole story. You read it in the book. It's a true
Mhm.
story. We had baby eagles and we raised them. Those are our pets. Kids in the south had cats and dogs. We had eagles. Who else gets to live like that? It was like amazing. And that's the beauty of the book that I've written. It's a beautiful book. I know so because people say so. People have been covering me with louanges. Les louanges en français, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire ça? Praises.
Mm.
Yeah, praising, yeah, admiration, whatever. And they say it's beautiful. So I guess it must be beautiful. So I hope you buy it. Because if you don't buy it, I'll never come back to London, Ontario.
and can look forward to a whole series, which is wonderful because that was one question I had is like, is there going to be more? And so
Oh
you've
yeah, it's gonna be
answered
much
that. Yeah.
more. Yes.
So
I'm looking at the little screen at the bottom of your chest, across your mighty chest. That names all the names of you saying hi from so and so. Hi, their name they identify themselves who are taking part in the participating in the powwow, and so there's all over the place here. There's even some from Toronto. Lots of Toronto. My
yeah,
goodness.
you have people from all over
I know
tuning
goodness has
in.
nothing to do with it. I know Toronto has nothing to do with goodness whatsoever. But my goodness.
Well, thank you for that wonderful,
Yes.
fulsome answer to basically what inspired this work and what we have yet to look forward to in anticipation. I'm sure many people will be looking forward to reading the follow-up books that will come forward. In this work, I was really struck by how you wove together multiple worlds, right? In your retelling of your childhood,
Mhm.
growing up on the land with
Mhm.
your family, very beautiful, touching depictions in there. And there's such an epic experience about the world you see
Anyway.
and share through the Cree perspective too, right?
Mhm.
So by contrast, you share with the readers some of the ways you learn to navigate the world of education
Mhm.
at Guy Hill Residential School.
Mhm.
What was it like for you to write like this, to weave in and out of these spaces, these memories, these moments of recounting survival, humor, and resilience?
Moose Factory. Oh my goodness, we're getting further and further north. Okay, first of all, I've never done anything by myself. You know, I've done a lot. I've learned how to play the piano. You know, to come from that kind of landscape and become a concert pianist, take that, Rosedale. You know, how many boys from Rosedale can do that? You know. Anyway, I'm very proud of that. You know, to be able to sit down at a piano and play Rachmaninoff. You know, just like that. I have grand piano upstairs, my beautiful Steinway concert, 7-foot Steinway concert grand in my living room upstairs, and my little keyboard, my electric keyboard is down here in my basement office. This is where I write my music and I play it upstairs. Yeah, so that kind of lifestyle.
Mhm.
Um, how one gets from there to here, and I
Mhm.
lived in Europe for like about 20 years. C'est pour ça que je parle français maintenant, parce que j'ai vécu en France pendant 14 ans. Like, that's why I speak French now fluently, because I lived in France for 14 years. And how many boys from Rosedale can say that they can speak perfect French, eh? And perfect Italian. Plus, we lived after we left France, we lived in Italy for 2 years, Rome for 3 years, and winters only, and Naples in the south for the next 3 years until we got chased out. Until we got chased out by the pandemic 2 years ago, and we've been here ever since. Well, I just the school years. Okay, you have to understand this is a different world, a different time zone, a different lifestyle, completely unimaginable in the south. But up there, our parents' generation either never went to school because there were no schools up there, or my dad was the oldest of a family of 12, the oldest, certainly the oldest boy. So he had 6 younger brothers, and anyway, it's a long story. We actually had one older brother and 4 younger brothers, 5 younger brothers, and the younger ones all went to residential school, which was reasonably close to Pelican Narrows, Saskatchewan, which is just north of Flin Flon, which is where my father's from. But he never went because the oldest son drowned when he was 16, and so the next in line, who was my father, who was 13 at the time, had to take over the family duties of helping his dad take the care of the family. It's a very harsh lifestyle, and so he had to work very cutting wood. We had only wood stoves to warm our houses with. We had to hunt for our food. We didn't have superstores or Loblaws or anything like that. And so he never went to school, and he saw his younger brothers and sisters going to school one after another and learning how to read and write. They achieved grade 7, but back then it was normal. You know, a lot of white people, you know, your grandparents, all your white people in that room, out there, that virtual room, you know, your grandparents probably had the same experience. They got here from Europe, barely alive, and we're lucky they got grade 4 or grade 6. My partner is Franco-Ontarian from Sudbury, Ontario, and his father had grade 4. Hmm? That kind of, it was, everybody had that kind of experience back then. People back then were poor. We all were. People in Europe were starving to death. which is why they had to come here to save their lives so they could eat. Yeah? And now they eat very well, thank goodness. And but he felt a little bit. He was not a bitter man. He was a very, very happy man, a very joyful man. But he did have that hurt in his heart about not having out of school, not being able to write, not being able to read, not even he learned eventually how to write a signature. But he spoke, developed a kind of pidgin English, so he could speak to bush pilots and traders at the Hudson's Bay Company store and occasional non-native people like that. But a very elementary English. But what I'm so proud of him so proud of him for, and I'm proud of him. I mean, he was the best father there ever was. I always say that I come from the kind of marriage that they can only dream about in Hollywood. They will never make enough money in Hollywood to be able to afford the kind of marriage that I come from. 60 years of love, love, and more love. How many kids can say that, you know? So of course he loved us to Capricious, and we were precious too. Like by the time you lose 5 children, the last ones at the end, us, me and my younger brother Rene, were treasures. We were treasured, we were cherished beyond compare. We were the diamonds at the end of the necklace, okay? And we were treated accordingly. We weren't spoiled, we worked very hard. I started getting water. There was no running water. So I had to go down the hill with 2 little lard pails when I was 5 years old to get the water from the chop a hole in the ice. Well, somebody else did that. An adult man, our neighbor, did that. But I was the one responsible for putting the pail in icy water and coming up with 2 pails, 2 little lard pails, and I trundled up the hill to my house, to our little house, our little log house, so that my sister could do the washing, do the laundry. You know, these days, of course, you just press a button and a machine does that for you, right? Well, we didn't. It would take her the entire day to wash all the family's clothes on Mondays, and then hang them out to dry outside, and on and on and on. So, and my father, it was a harsh life. We were hungry a lot of the time. We were poor. We never had money. It was a non-cash economy anyway. But he wanted us to go to school to get a better life than that. He wanted the last 2 anyway, because he'd already had his parenting experience with the first 2 who survived to adulthood, and the 5th one, and the other 2, they all survived to adulthood. And he had his parenting experience with them. So with 5 kids, I lose track of the number of kids. So he had that parenting experience with us, but the last 2 were treasures, and he wanted them to have a beautiful, beautiful education. And he said to me, I used to help him fish. I started helping him fish with commercial fishermen in the summertime. When I was 11, the summer I was 11, I started helping him because he used to operate his business. He was a really good businessman with four canoes with little outboard motors at the back, 10 horsepower, as I say. And there were 2 uncles, 2 brothers, and then a couple of helpers, and then him. And then he ran out of men this one summer when I was 11. So he put me to work, and I became his partner. And I got to spend the entire day out in the most beautiful lake on earth, in the water fishing for trout and pickerel and whitefish. And that was our way of making our way of life. And so I got, and just spending from 3 o'clock, we used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Fishing is hard work. Getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning every day, 6 days a week. We had Sundays off. And I did that all summer, and in that I spent the entire day. My job was to gut the fish. These hands, even though they're piano players, have gutted over 1 million fish. And but in that way, I got to spend more time with this magnificent man, my father, Joe Highway, than most boys do with theirs in a lifetime. And that's God's truth. You know, who else gets that privilege? So I wanted to do well by him. And we used to talk as the boat was walking on the beautiful waters of Reindeer Lake, heart-to-heart talks between an 11-year-old boy and he was 53 that year. I was 11, and and he wanted me and in the end, as the summer came to an end and I had finished at that boarding school, and I was being sent to high school in Winnipeg, which is even further away. There was a part of me that wanted to stay with them, but there was another part of me that wanted to see the world. So he encouraged me. He said, "You go to school, my son. You go to school, and that way you won't have to work you won't have to have a life like mine." By the end of August, you see, the lakes up there are so cold that even though we had gloved hands to deal with the water, they were only partially waterproof, so that by the time September rolls around, your hands, because you spend the entire day with your hands in the water, dealing with getting fish, untangling fish from the nets, your hands were blue from the cold, and so that's hard. And he didn't want us to live like that. So he said, go to school, he said to me this one day. And I remember it so clearly, and it's in the book, the composition at the end of the book. He said, you go to school and you won't have to, he said it all in Cree, he didn't speak English. I mean, he spoke pidgin English to white people, but to us, it was all Cree. And Denny, we spoke in the Denny language. This was so far north that we were actually Cree people living in Denny country. So we had the added privilege of growing up in two native languages. And he said, go to school, my son, because that way you will not have to live the hard life that I have. All you will have to do is sit at your desk and read with your book open like this, and all you will have to do is lean over every once in a while and turn the page. And you know what? That's exactly what I do today. Except in my case, it's not just a book whose pages I'm turning. I'm turning the pages of a score by Rachmaninoff and Chopin sitting at a grand piano. That's the kind of lifestyle he wanted me to have. So I had to go to school, not just for me, but for him. So I worked doubly hard. I worked twice as hard as everybody else, and I got the highest marks in the school, almost without fail. I worked very hard, and so when you work hard, you get. The reason successful people are successful is because they work hard. It's the equation is so simple to understand. So I went to school for two people. So I went to school doubly hard. I went to school for me and my father. And that's why I decided to go to school and have a very good time. And I would master everything that was taught to me and learned extremely well and learned several languages and all that, just like he did. He amazed me. To this day, when I think back to it, I look around me. I live in Gatineau. I've lived in Toronto for 20 years. I've lived in Europe. I've lived all over the world, my God. And I see people around me with PhDs in literature and philosophy and quantum physics and God knows what else. And yet they speak only one language. My father never set foot in a school for one day, and he spoke 4 languages. And I'm very proud of that. My father was a great man. He had a great heart, a great spirit. And so I try to follow in his footsteps. I always feel his presence in my life. He's gone now. And for instance, when I'm playing a concert on stage, he was an accordion player. My father was a great accordion player. His father before that was a fiddler, a legendary fiddler. So I swear to God, when I play my concerts, oh my God, I played concerts in concert hall, amazing concert halls. Like the biggest one so far is like I work in places like Kerner Hall in Toronto, La Maison Symphonique de la Place des Arts in Montreal, the Royal Alex in Toronto, and so on and so forth. My goodness. And when I'm sitting on stage playing my piano, just rocking away, I swear to God, in the heat of the moment, I can feel my father and my grandfather standing behind me, just rocking away with their fiddle and their accordion and laughing to beat the band. They were laughers. Music makes one very happy. Music is one of the great keys to happiness. So I have that too. I have that gift. They passed it down to me, and I received it gladly, and I do the maximum amount of work that I can with it, and I love it.
Yeah, I think that really there's something about that resonates really quite profoundly in something you quoted of your father that I think was an important teaching that he left and instilled in you, which is it's a little later in the book where he says, "From disaster, make something spectacular."
Yes,
It's just so
absolutely.
poetic and wonderful, and a great way to.
And actually, it's an elite motif, as they say in opera. To that theme of him driving through that dog sled, the blizzard, and meeting disaster, and then just lying down and having a beautiful nap. That's what he'd do in moments of crisis. And so that appears as a leitmotif for the book. And so that you see me at the end climbing into my dog sled and riding headlong into a blizzard. And the last words in the book is, I think I'll take a nap.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing right now. I'm taking a glorious nap. I'm living out a glorious dream.
And that is remarkable because it's also something that really, there's this one moment in the work that I thought it was just a beautiful way you captured your father, and it just takes me back with what the story you're telling here is where you're both in the canoe heading back home, and it gets really dark and you're still in the middle of the lake, and he lovingly wraps you in the goose down blanket to keep you warm and safe, and continues on paddling while you get to look at the night sky.
Oh
There's
my
a sense
God.
of like when you're actually venturing into sometimes the unknown, but being calm and present in it. And I think that there's those sort of elements of your father is something that I think is wonderfully embraced in the way you're writing, not just about your family and your father, but also your own path where you are to today. And you are speaking to that profoundly in the work. And what I thought was striking was also your representation of the whole spectrum of masculinity and femininity too. You talk about wanting to address that in various ways. And so I think it was wonderful to see real raw resilience, but also a tenderness and assurance that you see that comes to the surface in that in the storytelling, and how you speak about your brother, about your siblings. And I was really excited actually, because I often ask question, what's the bit of that trajectory of your musical development, to have learned about the presence of the accordion in the family, to your grandpa who jigged. And the thinking that sort of stayed with me was this line. And again, this is another one of those moments where I said, this is a beautiful way to capture the importance and the value of music, where you say, with no accordion in the house is dark, the house is soulless. Of course, a house needs music, right? So I wonder if we might want to share a bit about how that in your formative years, how the presence of music in your family sort of gave you that fire that you've carried as a musician to today.
Well, I don't know. People sometimes ask, like, why did you pick the piano and not the violin or the guitar? And the answer to that is, a person does not pick an instrument. The instrument picks them. I tried flute. I tried double bass. God knows, terrible. I tried the guitar. I've tried other instruments, and none of them work for me. Only the piano does. I'm obsessed with it. The first one I saw was at the boarding school I went to, and I was obsessed. You know how most kids hate piano lessons?
Mm.
You can't force them to, you can't make them practice. Well, I was the opposite. A wild-haired caribou couldn't have pulled me away from that piano. Somebody here wants to talk about my brother. My brother, I had a beautiful brother called Rene Highway. He passed away at age 35 in 1990. He was he was a modern dancer, which is the kind of ballet dancer who dances modern dance as opposed to classical ballet. Uh, and he was the 12th. I'm the 11th. He was the 12th. And so we grew up like twins. And and a lot of people don't know. Another thing that I wanted people to know about a little slice of the history of Canada is that part of the world was that Manitoba, Saskatchewan border, Nunavut border. That little corner has like an incredibly complex river system that drains eventually southward and then back north again. It goes through the northern tip of Lake Winnipeg, and up to then all the way up to Hudson's Bay. And so that the St. Lawrence wasn't the only way for Europeans to enter North America. There was also, of course, the Pacific Ocean on the other side, but we also had Hudson's Bay, and Manitoba is at the southern tip, at the southern end of Hudson Bay, and so and all across the north there were there back then Hudson's Bay trading posts and little stores that sold certain essentials like coffee and flour and bullets for hunting guns and stuff like that. And so those and of course we traded for furs. We traded furs for trade goods, and a lot. And so those boats left. The Hudson's Bay Company was based in London, England, and the boats. It was founded in 1670, before most of us were born. Anyway, and but it was folly for them to go down after Hudson's Bay out the Thames River, which goes down to the North Sea. It would have been folly for them to go southward and cross the English Channel, go through the English Channel, because all through those years, wars were happening. The French and the English were forever fighting. There was one war after another, after another, after another, and there was piracy in that channel. It was very easy to get your ship pirated. I don't know if there's such a such a term. Anyway, Anglais, English is not my language. I'm so sorry, folks. But so they went the other way. They went up the north coast of England, the north coast, the east coast of England, which gives onto the North Sea, and up the east coast of Scotland. And before they made the great crossing across to the Atlantic Ocean to go to Hudson's Bay, they had to pass by a little group of islands called the Orkney Islands, which is at the northern tip of Scotland. It's a beautiful place. You should go sometime. Great hiking for those of people who like hiking. And what people don't know is that the Orkneys were actually Scandinavian, not Scottish. And when you go there, we were there 3 summers ago. They're not. They look. They don't look Scottish. Scottish people are darkish and swarthy, and they have large nostrils and thick purplish lips. Well, some of them do. Anyway, but the Orkney Orcadians, we call them today, they're fair. They look like Norwegians. They look like Vikings, and they're beautiful people. They're really attractive people. Norwegian, Scandinavian people are beautiful people. And anyway, and because they were isolated, it's an isolated group of islands. They had their own education system, which is more Norwegian than it was Scottish, so it was better. So those people had a better education, and they could do, among other things, accounting. They developed really good arithmetic classes and arithmetic courses and accounting classes. So people there knew how to count, do accounting. And what the Hudson's Bay Company needed to man those trading posts in northern Canada was accountants, because they were going to trade for furs with the Indians, right? So you had to count the money and count the furs and all that. So, and they managed all the little trading posts up there. Most of them were actually managed by Orcadians, Vikings. Even the boats that went up the rivers, the river systems, were a smaller version of the Viking longboat, because they had the same architectural skills, right? And designing skills. And so the white men, the first white men that we met up there were actually Vikings. And of course, and they met all the trading posts up there, and they came without their women. There were a lot of them are just 18-year-old boys. They were very young, 21-year-old boys. At one point, they say that 80% of the Hudson's Bay Company payroll was Orcadian. And they were beautiful. And of course, they didn't have any women, right? So what do they do to have a good time? They changed the name of the HBC, as the Hudson's Bay Company was called, to the Horny Boys Club. Okay? Face the music, folks. What do boys do when they get bored? Well, there's the girls, right? So anyway, that's how Orcadian blood entered the bloodstream of our people up there, which is why that part of the world, well, President Company accepted, we had the most extraordinary looking people up there. Beautiful. That's where the beauty of the people up there come. I have cousins who looks like Elvis Presley at the height of his beauty. I have cousins who look like girl cousins who look like Catherine Ross, from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman. Cousins who look like that because of this mixture of blood. And so my younger brother was given this gift of extreme beauty. Many called him, when he was alive, the most beautiful man who ever walked the face of the earth. And that's true. It really is true. I wish I had pictures to show you. There's lots of pictures on the internet. Just Google Rene Highway, Rene, and you see him. And he became a dancer. And so, when dancers, unfortunately, have to start looking for an alternative career as they push 30 and 40, because it's a brutal lifestyle. It's the hardest of all the arts. They have to think of many of them become teachers, many of them go into other fields like real estate and television production and whatnot. And some of them the lucky ones become choreographers. And so he was slowly becoming a choreographer. He was experimenting with choreography when he was around 30. And the first thing a choreographer needs is music. So I have a music degree, which is in piano performance, but I did take all the courses required to compose. I took form, counterpoint, harmony, history, orchestration. We even learned how to conduct an orchestra, if you can imagine. But I had the chops to write a symphony. I wouldn't do it though. A, it's too much. It's way too much. B, who would play it, right? And chances are nobody. So it would be a waste of my time. But I do write music, and I'm playing a concert soon here in Ottawa, and at the National Arts Centre. and I do write songs because anyway, blah blah blah. So I started writing music for my brother to dance to, and so we became a team. Two Cree men on stage, one sitting at the grand piano and the other one dancing ballet. Right? Oh, it was beautiful. Well, it must have been beautiful. I never saw it because I was in the show, you know. But that was my brother, and he developed AIDS, unfortunately, during the big epidemic of the 1985 to 1995 was a big decade for AIDS, and he hit it dead on. And so he left us, but the music's still there. I still have the music in my heart, and I still play it every day on one of my two pianos. And he still dances with me. And the last thing he did before he slipped away was, "Don't mourn me, be joyful," when he knew he was going to die. And so those words have stayed with me all this time. And so now I have the responsibility, because I love them very, very much. Now I have the responsibility of being joyful, not just for one person, but for two people. I am joyful for myself, and I am joyful for my brother, which is why it is impossible for someone to stop me from having a good time. My middle name is Good Time, and that's all there is to it. I am the world's most positive man, and you can't stop me.
Well, that is definitely a wonderful motto and way to operate. I certainly see how that's sort of been present in all the kind of work you have done. There is a joy, but also um, uh, a humanness and humanity to the work that and the stories that you tell. In this work, I felt like your parents, both of them, were quite present in it, and I was curious about the influence that your mother has also had on your life, and your sister Louise. I was especially struck with when you would turn to the story by saying, now through their eyes, this is how they told it. I'm telling you, when you talk about your birth and those first few days of like the surviving through those elements, I feel like you were present there. It's like the way they told you the story is so much like
Oh,
you
they told
were
us. They
alive.
told me that.
Yeah,
Louise told me that story
yeah.
many times over the years, and yeah, she smoked cigarettes. She was 12 years old, and She had to smoke cigarettes all night long because my father had gone hunting, and in a dog sled, and we were in this little tent pitched in a snowbank, and I wasn't even 10, 12 hours, or I wasn't even 4 hours old when my sister had to keep that stove going all night long, or else we would freeze, and I would freeze to death, and I would die. It was real because we already had lost 5 children, right? So I came close to dying, and but my sister saved me by smoking by smoking cigarettes all night long, because my mother had heard, she was desperate. She had heard that smoking kept you awake, and so anyway, so there's that, and also because my parents had lost so many children, and we came so close to dying so many times as children, that he wanted to send us to a place where death wouldn't get us, you know, and to go to a safe place, and where we would have not only a great education, but but safety, where we eat well, we're well dressed, all those things. Yeah. So that's why my boarding school years were very happy years, because I made them so. It was a personal decision of mine. Personal happiness is an act of self will. Yeah, it's you decide. You decide to be miserable, you'll be miserable as hell. You know, one of the comment on dit ça, beaux mots, qu'est-ce que c'est?
Like wise words.
Wisdom, words of
Yeah.
wisdom. I've taken in my old age. I was thinking of fancy little things for my writing. I had to keep. I'm a writer, so I have to invent turns of phrase. But one of them is the one I like, which I came up with recently. Somebody else might have invented it before me, but I invented this one too. Perfection is static. Imperfection is dynamic. That's why you have to be imperfect. If you're perfect, you wouldn't. There'd be no purpose for living. You're perfect. So the one that I come up with recently is that because people have been asking me about this residential issue repeatedly, and my answer always is: living in the past is a surefire recipe for failure and misery. Living in the present and in the future, on the other hand, is a surefire recipe for success and happiness. And that's all there is to it. Yeah. That's my answer to that question.
So what are the ways what are the ways in which you express your happiness through, other than writing, if you do it through music? How do you convey that to your audiences?
Well, I think that the other thing about going to school and doing all that hard work when I was a child,
Mhm.
I did. My father taught. My father didn't teach. He wasn't a preacher. He did it by example. His one of his big things was he taught us how to think about others before we thought of ourselves. So if I suffered at that residential school, I don't think about it. I didn't suffer very much, first of all. I mean, people forget that those schools had the entire gamut of people in there. You can't paint us all with the same brush, eh? You know, there's a high school in Toronto, for instance, where the top one of the most famous graduate was Norman Jewison, who was one of the great film directors of all time in Hollywood. He's from Malvern Collegiate in Scarborough, I think it is Scarborough. On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, you had Paul Bernardo, who raped and killed what, 151 women? So from the same school, the same town, the same culture. So the entire gamut of negative to positive. We had the same thing. We had brilliant kids, and we had kids who weren't as talented and who were victimized. You know, and so you can't paint us all with the same brush. There was an entire variety of human beings in there, and so a big part of my life is thinking about others before I think about myself. I believe that one of the great keys to happiness is thinking about yourself, thinking about others before you think yourself. I think thinking about others first before you thinking about yourself first before you think of others makes you makes you miserable, and makes other people around you miserable, and you see that everywhere around you. Whereas on the other hand, you think about those people first, you're a happy man. So I have maybe about 10 years left of my life. I'll be 70 in about 3 weeks. And I'll be lucky if I have 10 more years left on Earth. And when in a sense, in a sense, I can't wait. I'm getting tired, you know. I'm getting tired of being constantly in a state of extreme excitation. Um, I, uh, I only have 10 years to rush around. Like I said earlier, I've never done anything by myself. I've always been helped by incredible, beautiful people, talented people, generous people, loving people. I've had a lot of love in my life. I am so loved right now in this house that I could choke to death on love. Um, I only have 10 more years left to run around as fast as I can, thanking anybody and everybody who's ever shown a spot of kindness to me. So that's the entire 10 purpose of my 10 last years on earth is one great big act of thanks for the gift that life has given me. And that's all there is to it.
And I sense that you are finding a way to think of others in the way you're writing, the way you're remembering them, and the way you are imparting the legacy of their lives in your writing. And I think that is an act of generosity, and in terms of the way you are, recounting and remembering the people in your life.
Mhm.
And one person that I really would love to hear a bit more, if you so would indulge us, is a bit about how you came to your instrument. And I know that you were fast tracking in the one, and I'm reading in the passage where you in the first year you got through the first 5 years of your like
Vibrating when you're
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I mean, there was definitely someone supporting you in that musical development of yours. And I was wondering if you'd like to speak a bit about that teacher, sharing a bit about what she imparted in terms of being a musician, and how you developed to become one.
You mean the little old nun who taught me? Well, she was okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember being shown certain tricks, and I was infinitely grateful for the lessons that I got. And she influenced me, and I'm always thankful to her. I thank her every day with when I play the C major scale first thing in the morning. She was the one who taught me how to do that. But I had other teachers after that, and the last one I had, the one who turned me into a true pianist, his name was William Aid, and he taught right there at Western, and in Faculty of Music down the hill from University College, right next to Talbot College. Oh, I remember it well. And he was the one who turned me into a real pianist, and he put a lot of energy into me, and he gave me a lot of love. So he's one person I thank every day, every day. He and his wife, they were the kindest people on earth. And to brag just a little bit about my pianistic pedigree, he had the same teacher as Glenn Gould. You know, the best, arguably the best concert pianist Canada has ever produced, or even the world has ever produced. You know, that's the kind of piano technique that developed me. I didn't quite master it because I stopped too soon, anyway, for a reason. But I did. I had the most extraordinary musical education. He taught me all the ins and outs of the techniques of playing Chopin and Schumann and Scriabin and Shostakovich, and oh my goodness, I learned all this literature. And because we were, in order to get a music degree, you have to learn all the different disciplines. So not only do you play the solo piano, you had to accompany opera singers. We had to accompany leaders, German singers of German lieder, like namely composers like Schubert and Schumann and Wolf, Hugo Wolf, and then of course chamber music. You know, like we had to play the music, chamber music written by Bach and Beethoven and Mendelssohn, etc., etc. So I got that literature instilled in me. I had a beautiful trio. The violinist was from Saskatoon, the cellist was from Windsor, and I was from a snowbank in Northern Band with the piano player. But we had a great trio, and we had great coaches, and man, and we could have become professional. And Shelley and Mark, they were called, they wanted to become professionals, and we could have become professionals. But I saw certain limitations in that kind of career. I wouldn't have been terribly happy being there was more things that I wanted to do. My vision was too broad. I wanted to go to do other things. And I did that. And then I came back to music later on. But I still have the skills. The fingers are still there.
Well, and remind those who are listening, when are you performing in Ottawa?
When am I performing in Ottawa? Oh dear, it's almost embarrassing. I'm performing this December the 11th, okay. And it's a Saturday night. But this is the embarrassing part of it. The National Arts Centre has decided to throw me a 70th birthday party, and my birthday is actually on December the 6th. But there's 4 theaters in the National Arts Centre, 4 concert halls, but because none of them were available on December the 6th, the first night that was available was Saturday night, December the 11th. So on December the 11th, I'm playing a concert with some singers and some fantastic musicians, and oh my goodness, it's going to be a blast. It's going to be I'm playing a whole series of songs and dance pieces, and Rene will be part of it. He's being projected on a slideshow, and we're going to be doing some of the dances that we did together, kind of like Natalie Cole did with her father, Nat King Cole, when she did that song, Unforgettable. Like what I don't know what you call the technique, but he'll be dancing too, and I'll be playing the piano, and they're going to give me a beautiful 9-foot Steinway concert grand piano to play on, and that's the show. It's 7:30 p.m. that night, and then there's a big party afterwards, and we're going to have a very good time.
Well, awesome.
My great princess' birthday is on December the 6th. Somebody just said, "Oh my goodness!" Anyway, that's what it's. I know. So yeah, we're heading straight for my. I'm going to turn 70 with a great big blast. And my mother, as my mother also said all her life. My mother said this all her life. Oh, she was a darling. She was also very pretty. She's a beautiful woman. Her family, they were good-looking people. Orcadian blood. See, I don't have a great face right now. I used to be pretty when I was young, but I still have Orcadian lips. If you look at my lips, they're Orcadian lips. And if you look at my ass, I have an Orcadian ass. But you should go to the Orkneys if you get a chance. It's a great place for a holiday. And you go to Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is a really nice city. And then you can take a train or a bus all the way up to the northern tip, and then go hiking and there's a little ferry boat that crosses, and you can go hiking on the Orkneys. And you know the Orcadians, to this very day, they are connected to the Cree people of northern Manitoba. So when I got there and they found out who I was, I was embraced like a long lost son. Like old white ladies would say in their beautiful accents, "We are related to the Cree Indians," this one woman said. I was embraced, I was squeezed, oh my goodness, it was just beautiful. So those Cree people who come from the north, tell them who you are, and you'll be embraced, you'll be squeezed, you'll be kissed, and God knows what else. You might end up being a very lucky person of whatever gender you are. These days, of course, anything goes, right? Anyway, so yeah, go to the Orkneys. You won't be sorry.
I'm just looking at the Q&A at some of the questions that your dear listeners are posing. And one has asked, whereabouts in France have you lived?
I lived in 14 years in the south, right on in a village called Banyuls-sur-Mer, which means
Mhm.
Banyuls on the sea. Banyuls is a Catalan word. Actually, it's Catalonia, Catalan, France, which spills over into Spain because you have Spanish Catalonia as well, which the capital of which is Barcelona.
Mhm.
So we were right next to the Spanish border, 9 kilometers, right on the sea, on a cliff, because that's where the Pyrenees plunge in the Mediterranean. So it was spectacular. And my hiking, I'm a hiker, hiking through the mountains, climbing the Pyrenees and over into Spain. Oh, I used to do that on weekends. And because they didn't really have winter there, right? It's like a permanent, perpetual October. Uh, and then, of course, spring arrives in March and everything is warm and you can wear shorts. But that's where we were, in 9 kilometers from the Spanish border, just the second last village in France before you get to Spain. And the other thing we used to love doing was jump on the train and go to Barcelona for weekends and just go and party. At Barcelona in Spain is one of the most happening cities in Europe, the sexiest city in Europe, and that's where I started learning Spanish as well, which is a very, very fancy thing to do. That's where we were. Beautiful, beautiful place. And oh yeah, the French people just loved us. Oh my God, they were so kind to us. Yeah.
Fantastic. There's some that are inquiring. They've mentioned that they've seen either Dry Lips or they saw the Red Sisters, and some who haven't seen maybe one or the other. They're curious when they might see one of your works on stage. Do you have any
Well,
insights?
yeah, well, you just missed one. There was one in Stratford this
Oh,
past summer.
yes.
Yeah, and it was sold out. Nobody could get in. Part of that being that of the pandemic, right? They had to have limited seating,
And
and
it was outside in the,
a lot of
yeah.
people turned away, most unfortunately. But it was I actually went and saw that one. I try to avoid them, quite frankly, because there's just been so many bad productions. But oh yeah, you get the occasional good one, and that one is a good one. Fantastic, loved it. Completely different from what the way I envisioned it, but the director was just magnificent. Jessica Carmichael. I
Mhm.
had not known her until then. So the next one that I know of is happening in Winnipeg, as far as I know. And I can't talk about the other ones because there's no contract signed yet.
Okay.
You know? But they do come and they come and go. They come and go. You know?
So I'm going to try to, I think I get
Nothing in
the,
Alberta at the moment, not yet. I
okay.
can't talk. If I talk about these things, I'm afraid to jinx them.
You're jumping, yeah, jumping
Because
ahead,
something
right?
will
Yeah.
happen, and the director will die, or the theater will burn down. I don't know. Natural disasters. There'll be a flood. Edmonton will sink into the hole in the ground. Look what happened in Abbotsford. It's just my mother used to say all her life. She'd say goodbye, and so we'll see you later, or see you next week, and she'd say always, if I'm still alive. She would say. And she said that all her life, and we'd tell her, Mom, stop that. Of course you'll still be alive. But you know what? She lived to be 88, and that seems to be a good luck charm. You worked like a good luck charm for her. So I've started saying that. I'll see you next week if I'm still alive. Um, uh, if you go to the orphanage, there is a, and then there's an F. The sentence doesn't continue. Janet, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm missing.
If you go to the orphanage, we went to, for those of you who've been to Orkney, there's another island, there's a group of islands. The next island, we were at Stromness, which is the two towns, the two main towns in the Orkneys. One of them is called Stromness, which is the boat where they picked up the Hudson's Bay Company picked up the boys, the Orkney boys, to take them to Hudson's Bay. And that there's a ferry that goes to Stromness, and right next to it is an island called Hoy, Hoy. That's worth hiking through. Just Google it on. I love travel documentaries on YouTube. Hoy, Hoy. It's quite spectacular, and you can see the ruins of the old Druidic worship sites because they were Druids, right? And yeah, incredible.
So there's a question that I just want to throw your way. How do you maintain all your languages with fluency? Are you practicing it by speaking them with other people, readers, or incorporating it in your writing?
I didn't learn English until I didn't become fluent in English until I was about 15 when I was at high school in Winnipeg. I spoke Dene and Cree as a child. My Cree, I've lost most of my Dene because I never speak it. I still speak some though, but my Cree is in perfect condition. I write my songs in it, my plays in it. I'm going to be writing more and more in Cree in my books. And so and I talk to my relatives in northern Manitoba all the time by telephone and by texting and whatnot. Texting has entered the Cree lexicon. We say in Cree now, we say, "Madi textoasin," they will say. Will you please text me? Textoasin. I mean, text me. Or we used to say, "Pi phone at tawin." Pi phone at tawin. Come one of these days, phone me. Phone at tawin. We kind of developed a kind of Kringlish. They'll say something like, "I bet you'll understand this." This girl went to a hockey game, and afterwards she came home and she told us it was a very exciting hockey game. Her son had been playing it, and she said, she said, "So how was the hockey game?" And she said, "It'll go stay scream away, and then he got sore throat." Yeah, and she said, and you understand that? I screamed so hard, I got a sore throat. Yeah. So we develop a kind of Kringlish.
Mhm.
And then of course I live in French here in Quebec, where my partner is French, Franco-Ontarian. And we have grandchildren who speak French exclusively. So when I speak to my grandchildren, I have to speak French, and I love it. I love speaking French. And when we were living in Italy, I learned Italian. And mi adesso non posso parlare italiano. I can't. There's nobody. Well, I practice on the internet, but I can still speak it. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. And also, it helped that I was a classically trained musician, so that all the musical terms in classical music are Italian, like allegro, allegro non troppo, allegretto, presto con fuoco, andante cantabile, andante blah blah blah, and so on and so forth. Recitativo, recitativo accompagnato, etc., etc., etc. And and it's really easy. You understand when you get there that really all European languages are just basically the same language pronounced differently. So you come down, you go down the street, and you see a sign that says fermata. Well, in music, fermata on the score means stop. So right away you understand that you have to stop. It's a stop sign, a fermata in Italy, and so it goes. All these terms come back at you, and I practice as much as I can. I always listen to people. Learning other languages means that you're listening. You're developing your listening skills. So wherever I live in the world, wherever I travel in the world, I always make an effort when I first get there to learn at least 40 phrases, the most polite phrases like please, thank you, excuse me, where's the nearest, where is such and such a street? Those kinds of short phrases, they mean so much to the people who are there. I've done it in Japanese in Tokyo and other Japanese cities. I've done it in Czech. I've done it in Polish. I've done it in Arab, in Egypt and Morocco, and so on and so forth. You just make the extra effort to listen to those people and hear what they have to say. And if you don't, because if you don't, the heart of the country remains closed to you. Or if you do, the heart of the country opens out to you. I started speaking Polish to a taxi driver in Warsaw, Poland, and his eyes actually teared up. He was so glad to be talking to a tourist who wasn't forcing English down his throat, which is what most tourists unfortunately do. I refuse to do that. I just refuse. I work too hard at my English and my French and my Italian to understand what it's like to be a victim of linguistic terrorism, shall we say. That's a good word. I just invented that. Linguistic terrorism. I'm a
Yeah,
linguistic terrorist. Anyway, I'm going to have to go soon because we're running late here. And this is, by the way, a glass of water. I'm not drinking whiskey or anything like that. I don't like whiskey anyway. But water. I toast you all for being at my presentation. Il mio piacere. I'll do it in Italian, ok? Vorrei ringraziarvi tutti in questa sala, questa bella sala, di essere qui in questa bella sala. Grazie ho ascoltati, no, ascoltati il mio presentazione. Grazie mille. Alla prossima volta.
well, thank you so much, Tomson. Thank you so much for this hour, for spending some time, for answering some of the questions and talking with us about your new work. And is there anything you would like to leave us with in terms of what you hope people will take from this book before we all leave.
From the book?
Mhm.
Well, buy it.
Other than buy it, when they buy it and read it. Yes.
Buy it so that you know what I used to be. One of the things I've done in order to build my career, and all artists should go through this, is to go through immense hardship. Nobody will buy your first play. Nobody will produce your first book. So you do it yourself. And as a result, because that means you rent the theater yourself, you pay the actors yourself, all out of your own pocket, and you go become very, very broke. At one point, I ended up in a basement, at a friend's basement, sleeping beside the washing machine. Artists go through that. I understand that James Bond, Daniel Craig, the present James Bond, Daniel Craig, when he first arrived in London, spent the first week of his stay in London trying to break into show business, sleeping on a park bench in Hyde Park. A lot of people go through that, and it's a really a learning curve. Teaches you a lot about survival. And at one point, I was down to one servant, for God's sake. Can you imagine? Because I'm usually used to having 5 servants, but in one case in Toronto, I only had 1. Isn't that terrible? Where are you from, Spy?
Timiskaming.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Up north, yeah, way up there.
Hey.
So when you describe the islands and the lakes, like
I've been
really,
there. I work in Baldor sometimes.
yeah. So in I was on the northeastern Ontario side, but in that area, yep, up area. There north of there, yeah. But yeah, that area. Mm-hmm. So that's great. Yeah. Well, thank you, Tomson. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully people will catch your concert, and happy birthday.
Oh, and I play concerts in Toronto too.
Yeah.
And whatnot. Yep.
And then keep a lookout for your plays and productions, and I'm sure more to come. And
yeah. Okay, hang on. I also, as a musician, I just recorded my 4th CD, and the first country album in Cree with strictly Cree lyrics, and you can get it on any musical source on the internet. This is my first digital recording. It's called Cree Country, Tomson Highway. Just look for it and buy a digital copy, and you can listen to my songs. The packaging is not, it's sort of like an advanced release. It's not really a release because the packaging is still being prepared, and I don't know how that works digitally. Our designer, our illustrator, is putting the package together for what will be the cover of a CD with all the imagery and all the credits. I had magnificent musicians, and all the translations to all the songs, 12 songs. But they're all love songs. It's all about love, 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 and let more love. And they're very, very pretty music, played beautifully by some extraordinary, extraordinary musicians. And have a listen. Cree Country by Tomson Highway. No, it's just called Cree Country Tomson Highway. So
nice. Great. We'll look that up. All right. Thank you, Tomson.
And thank you to you too.
Yeah, much.
Oh my goodness. I'm reading what can I ask about them? Oh my goodness.
You're getting all lots of loving messages.
Well, that's the thing about the COVID, the pandemic. You can't hug anybody. You can't kiss anybody. My lips are getting dry from not kissing people. Maybe it's time for me to move to campus casing.
All right. Stay well.
A la prochaine.
A bientôt.
A bientôt.